The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Astoria Hotel's grand ballroom. Victoria Sterling adjusted her simple black uniform, checking her reflection in the polished silver tray she carried. Her rich auburn hair was pulled back in a modest bun, and she had deliberately chosen minimal makeup to blend in with the other service staff. None of the wealthy guests mingling around her had any idea that the woman refilling their champagne glasses was worth more than half of them combined. Victoria had grown up as the daughter of Richard Sterling, whose revolutionary energy storage technology had transformed him from a garage inventor into one of the world's richest men overnight. The Sterling fortune now reached into the billions, but wealth had brought unexpected challenges. Every man who pursued her seemed more interested in her bank account than her heart. After the third proposal from someone who barely knew her name but had memorized her net worth, Victoria decided she needed to discover what genuine attraction felt like. 6 months ago, she had created her elaborate disguise. With Elena's help, her childhood friend and now personal assistant, Victoria had crafted the identity of a struggling art student working multiple jobs to pay for college. She rented a modest apartment downtown, learned the skills needed for service work, and began moving through New York's elite circles as an invisible observer rather than a celebrated guest. Tonight's charity gala was particularly important. The event raised money for arts education, a cause close to Victoria's heart since her mother had been a passionate painter before her death. Victoria watched the guests with careful attention, noting how they spoke to the staff versus how they addressed each other. Most treated the servers like furniture, barely acknowledging their presence except to snap fingers for refills. She was refilling water glasses at a corner table when she overheard a conversation that made her pause. Two middle-aged women in expensive jewelry were discussing the evening's honoree with surprising cruelty. "James Montgomery thinks he's so noble with his technology scholarships," one sneered, diamonds glittering at her throat. "New money always tries too hard to prove they belong. At least he's not flashing his wealth like some people," her companion replied. "Though I heard his mother is desperate to find him a suitable wife. Someone with the right connections, if you know what I mean." Victoria continued her work, but her curiosity was piqued. She had heard of James Montgomery, the brilliant programmer who had built a software empire before his 30th birthday. Unlike many tech moguls, he seemed to avoid the spotlight, focusing on his work rather than publicity. As if summoned by her thoughts, a warm voice spoke beside her. "Excuse me, could I trouble you for some more coffee?" Victoria turned and found herself looking into the most striking gray eyes she had ever seen. James Montgomery stood before her, tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he had been running, his fingers through it. He wore his expensive suit with casual confidence, but there was something genuine in his expression that set him apart from the other guests. "Of course, sir," Victoria replied, keeping her voice professionally neutral while her heart unexpectedly quickened. "James, please," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "And thank you. I know these events can be exhausting for the staff. You're doing great work tonight." Victoria blinked in surprise. In all her months of working these events, no guest had ever acknowledged the effort required or thanked her personally. Most people spoke to servers and clipped commands, if they spoke at all. "It's my pleasure," she managed, pouring coffee into his cup with steady hands despite her racing pulse. James studied her face with open curiosity rather than the dismissive glance she had grown accustomed to receiving. "Are you new to this catering company?" "I attend these functions regularly, but I don't think we've met." "I'm filling in tonight," Victoria said, which was technically true, still learning the ropes. "But you're doing excellent work," James assured her. "What do you do when you're not keeping New York's elite properly caffeinated?" The question caught Victoria off guard. She had prepared responses about her fake job and apartment, but something about James's genuine interest made her want to share something real. "I'm studying art," she said, drawing from her actual passion, hoping to work in gallery curation someday. James's eyes lit up with interest. "That's fascinating. Contemporary or classical focus?" "Both, actually," Victoria replied, surprised. To find herself in an actual conversation, rather than the usual one-sided interactions. "I believe art should bridge different periods and styles rather than exist in isolation." "I couldn't agree more," James said enthusiastically. "Some of my favorite pieces combine traditional techniques with modern themes. There's something powerful about connecting past and present through creative expression." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp voice calling James's name. A silver-haired woman in pearls approached with purposeful strides, her gaze barely acknowledging Victoria's presence. "James, darling, you must meet Charlotte Pembroke," the woman announced, linking her arm through his with possessive familiarity. "She's the ambassador's daughter, just returned from studying at Oxford." Victoria recognized the maneuver immediately. She had watched similar scenes play out countless times at these events. Wealthy mothers orchestrating introductions between their children and suitable matches, treating romance like a business merger. "Mother, I was just having an interesting conversation," James said politely, but firmly. He turned back to Victoria with an apologetic expression. "Thank you for the coffee. I hope we can continue discussing art sometime." As Margaret Montgomery steered her son toward a cluster of young socialites, Victoria caught James glancing back at her. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room, and she felt that same electric connection that had surprised her during their brief conversation. Victoria returned to her duties, but her mind remained focused on James. Unlike the other wealthy men she had observed, he seemed genuinely interested in ideas rather than just displaying his status. He had spoken to her as an equal, engaging with her thoughts rather than dismissing them. Most importantly, he had treated her with basic human respect, something that seemed surprisingly rare among his social circle. As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself watching James navigate the social expectations placed upon him. She observed how he politely listened to potential matches his mother introduced, but his responses remained courteous rather than interested. During the charity auction, he bid generously on art pieces, but she noticed he seemed more engaged when speaking with the artists themselves than with the wealthy, collectors competing for their work. Near the end of the evening, Victoria was clearing glasses from empty tables when James appeared beside her again. This time, he carried a small piece of paper, which he discreetly placed beside her tray. "I know this might be inappropriate," he said quietly, "but I wondered if you might like to continue our conversation about art over coffee sometime." "No." Pressure? Of course. Victoria looked down at the paper, which contained his phone number written in careful handwriting. Her heart raced as she realized this successful, attractive man was genuinely interested in seeing her again. Not Luna Sterling, the billionaire heiress, but the person he believed her to be. "I would like that," she said softly, meeting his gaze directly. James's smile was brilliant. "Wonderful. I know a small gallery in Greenwich Village that serves excellent coffee and features emerging artists. Very different from tonight's scene." After James left with his mother, Victoria carefully folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. Alina appeared at her side moments later, having worked the event as additional security in an elegant evening gown. "Interesting conversation," Alina observed, with a knowing look. "It was just work," Victoria replied, but her friend's raised eyebrows suggested she wasn't fooled. "Work that left you glowing like that?" Alina teased gently. "Who was he, James?" "Montgomery," Victoria admitted, "and Alina, he was different. He actually saw me." Elena's expression grew concerned. "Victoria, you know how dangerous this is becoming. The longer you maintain this deception, the harder it will be to reveal the truth." Victoria understood her friend's worry, but for the first time in years, she felt hope about finding genuine connection. "I know it's complicated," she said, "but tonight felt real in a way nothing has for so long." As they left the hotel through the service entrance, Victoria couldn't shake the memory of James's gray eyes or the way he had spoken to her as though her thoughts mattered. She had started this experiment to find someone who could love her without knowing her wealth. Now she wondered if she was prepared for the consequences of actually finding that person. The city lights blurred past the window of Elena's car as they drove through Manhattan's late-night streets. Victoria touched the paper in her pocket, knowing she stood at a crossroads. She could stop this charade now, return to her real life, and forget about the tech mogul who had treated a waitress with unexpected kindness. Or she could take the risk of seeing where this connection might lead, knowing that every moment of happiness would be built on a foundation of lies. Looking at her reflection in the car window, Victoria made her choice. Tomorrow, she would call James Montgomery and accept his invitation. An equal about his genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams. She had found exactly what she was looking for, but the foundation of their relationship was built on lies. "I love him too much to keep deceiving him," Victoria said. "I'd rather He hear the truth from me, then discover it through Nathan Cross's manipulation. That night, Victoria lay awake planning how to reveal her identity to James. She would ask him to meet her at the Sterling estate, where the truth would be impossible. To deny, she would explain her reasons for the deception, and hope that his feelings for her were strong enough to overcome his anger at being misled. What Victoria didn't know was that Nathan Cross was already 3 steps ahead, planning to use her secret, in ways that would test both her love for James and his capacity for forgiveness. The game had become far more dangerous than a simple experiment in finding genuine love. The next morning would bring consequences that would change everything between them, and Victoria could only hope that the connection they had built was strong enough to survive the revelation of who she really was. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Victoria made her decision. Today, she would tell James Montgomery that the waitress he had fallen in love with was actually one of the richest women in America. The question was whether their love was real enough to survive the truth. The Sterling family estate stretched across 50 acres of pristine countryside an hour north of Manhattan, its neoclassical mansion rising like a monument to American wealth and ambition. Victoria stood at the massive windows of her father's study, watching James's car wind up the circular driveway. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her emerald silk dress. The expensive fabric, a stark contrast to the simple clothes James had always seen her wear. This morning had begun with Nathan Cross's unexpected visit to her father's office. As Alina had predicted, Nathan hadn't come to simply expose Victoria's secret. Instead, he had presented Richard Sterling with a carefully orchestrated blackmail scheme disguised as a business proposition. Your daughter has been conducting an interesting social experiment, Nathan had announced, spreading surveillance photos across Richard's mahogany desk. Playing Waitress to test her romantic prospects. It's quite clever, really, but potentially embarrassing if it became public knowledge. Richard Sterling, a man who had built his empire through careful calculation rather than emotional decisions, had listened to Nathan's proposal with growing anger, not at Victoria's deception, which he had known about and quietly supported, but at Nathan's audacity in threatening his family. What exactly do you want? Richard had asked coldly. A partnership, Nathan replied smoothly. Shared access to your energy storage patents and a seat on the Sterling board. In exchange, I'll ensure this amusing story about your daughter remains private. What Nathan hadn't anticipated was Richard Sterling's protective instincts. Within an hour of Nathan's departure, Richard had called Victoria with a simple message. Tell James the truth today, or I'll handle Nathan in ways that will make the situation much more complicated. Now watching James approach the house that represented everything she had hidden from him, Victoria felt the weight of her father's ultimatum and her own guilt pressing down on her shoulders. Lena appeared at her side, elegant in her role as a family advisor rather than the catering server James had occasionally seen her as. Staff is prepared to maintain your cover story if you change your mind, she offered quietly. No more lies, Victoria said firmly. He deserves the truth. James rang the front doorbell, and Victoria heard the butler's formal greeting echoing through the marble foyer. Moments later, Winston appeared at the study door with professional composure. Mr. Montgomery to see you, Miss Sterling. Victoria nodded, her heart pounding as James entered the room. He looked around the opulent space with obvious confusion, taking in the priceless art, leather-bound first editions, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. Victoria, James said uncertainly. The man at the door called you Miss Sterling, and this place he trailed off, clearly trying to reconcile the modest art student he knew with the obvious wealth surrounding them. Please sit down, Victoria, said gently, gesturing to the leather chairs arranged before her father's fireplace. I have something to tell you. James remained standing, his gray eyes searching her face with growing understanding and dawning betrayal. Who are you? My name is Victoria Sterling, she began, her voice stronger than she felt. My father. Is Richard Sterling, of Sterling Technologies, worth approximately $12 billion? The color drained from James's face as the implications hit him. You're Luna Sterling, the mysterious heiress who never appears in public? My public persona, Victoria confirmed, but everything I shared with you about my thoughts, my dreams, my feelings, that was all real. James laughed bitterly, running his hands through his dark hair. Real? You've been lying to me about everything fundamental. Your name, your background, your circumstances. Was any of it true? My love for you is true, Victoria said desperately. That's why I'm telling you now. Could have kept this secret indefinitely, but I can't build our future on lies. Our future, James's voice rose. With anger and hurt. What future? I don't even know who you are. The woman I fell in love with doesn't exist. She does exist, Victoria insisted, tears threatening. I am that woman. The wealth doesn't change my personality or my feelings, doesn't it? James challenged. You tested me like a laboratory specimen, observed how I treated the help, played out some elaborate social experiment, while I genuinely believed I was falling in love with someone real. Victoria flinched at his words, recognizing the truth in his accusation. It started as an experiment, she admitted, but it became real so quickly. James, you have to believe me. The study door opened, and Richard Sterling entered with commanding presence. At 65, he remained an imposing figure, his silver hair and expensive suit marking him as a man accustomed to power and respect. Mr. Montgomery, Richard said formally. I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting. James turned his attention to Victoria's father, his expression carefully controlled. Mr. Sterling, I assume you're aware of your daughter's deception? I am, Richard replied calmly. While I don't approve of her methods, I understand her motivations. Victoria has experienced considerable romantic disappointment from men interested only in her inheritance. So she decided to manipulate me instead, James said coldly. She decided to find genuine love, Richard corrected. The question now is whether you're capable of seeing past the circumstances to the person she actually is. Before James could respond, the study door burst open without announcement. Nathan Cross strode into the room with theatrical confidence, his silver hair perfectly styled and his smile predatory. What a touching family scene, Nathan announced. Though I fear I'm interrupting at a crucial moment. Nathan, Richard said dangerously. Oh, but I have such relevant information to share, Nathan replied, pulling out his phone. James, my boy, did you know your lovely Victoria has been photographed entering and leaving 2 different residences, playing rich girl by day and poor waitress by night? Nathan swiped through surveillance photos on his phone, displaying them with malicious satisfaction. Quite the performance, really. She even rented that charming little apartment to maintain her cover story. James looked at the photos with growing devastation, seeing undeniable evidence of Victoria's elaborate deception. Known? He asked Nathan. Suspected from our encounter in the park, Nathan admitted. Facial recognition technology confirmed my suspicions within hours. Why are you here, Nathan? Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. To offer James some valuable perspective, Nathan replied smoothly. You see, James, this isn't just about romantic deception. The Sterling family has been manipulating you professionally as well. Nathan produced additional documents from his briefcase. Is that mysterious foundation that funded your community development project? Renaissance Futures? Shell company owned by Victoria herself. She's been pulling strings behind the scenes of your entire career. The betrayal in James's eyes deepened as he processed this revelation. Victoria had not only deceived him personally, but had interfered in his professional life without his knowledge or consent. You funded my project, James said quietly, the words heavy with disappointment. Because I believed in your vision, Victoria said desperately, because what you're trying to accomplish matters. She would continue being the person he had met tonight, even though she wasn't entirely sure anymore which version of herself was real and which was the performance. The game had become far more dangerous than she had anticipated, but the possibility of genuine love made the risk feel worthwhile. For the first time since creating her false identity, Victoria Sterling was truly excited about what tomorrow might bring. 3 weeks had passed since Victoria first met James at the charity gala, and their connection had deepened in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. They had met for coffee at the small Greenwich Village gallery as planned, where their conversation had flowed effortlessly from contemporary art to philosophy to their dreams for the future. James had a brilliant mind that challenged her thinking, and his passion for using technology to solve real-world problems pressed her more than any display of wealth ever could. Victoria found herself living a carefully orchestrated double life. During the day, she maintained her role as an art student, working part-time catering jobs, meeting James at small cafes and independent bookstores, far from the social circles where she might be recognized. In the evenings, she would transform, back into her true identity, attending board meetings and managing her portion of the Sterling empire through her assistant. Elena's careful coordination, the deception required constant vigilance. Victoria had memorized details about her fictional modest apartment, practiced discussing financial struggles she had never experienced, and learned to hide her extensive knowledge of business and high society. Each lie came easier than the last, justified by the genuine happiness she felt in James's presence. This particular evening, they walked through Central Park as autumn painted the leaves in brilliant colors. James had insisted on buying her dinner at a small Italian restaurant, despite her protests about the expense. His thoughtfulness touched her deeply, knowing he believed she was struggling financially while he was being generous with his own resources. "Tell me about your family," James said as they found a quiet bench overlooking the lake. "You've mentioned your mother was artistic. But what about your father?" Victoria's heart clenched. She had prepared for this question, but dreaded it nonetheless. "He wasn't really present when I was growing up," she said, which contained a grain of truth. Richard Sterling had been consumed with building his business empire during her childhood. After my mother died, we became somewhat estranged. Reached for her hand, his touch warm and comforting. "I'm sorry, that must have been incredibly difficult." "What about your family?" Victoria asked, deflecting attention from her own fabricated story. "Your mother seems very involved in your life." James laughed, but the sound held little humor. "That's one way to put it. Margaret Montgomery has very specific ideas about what my future should look like. She's been parading eligible socialites in front of me since I graduated from Stanford." "Anyone catch your interest?" Victoria asked, surprised by the jealousy that flared in her chest. "Not until recently," James said, his gray eyes holding hers, with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I never expected to find someone who challenges me intellectually while making me forget about business pressures entirely." Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed insistently.
"Elena's
Emergency signal." Victoria glanced at the message and felt ice flood her veins. Nathan Cross, a rival businessman who had been trying to acquire Sterling technology for years, was asking questions about her recent absences from social events. He had noticed Luna Sterling's mysterious disappearances from the public eye. "Everything all right?" James asked, noticing her sudden tension. "Just work," Victoria lied, forcing a smile. "The catering company sometimes changes schedules at the last minute." "You work too hard," James said gently. "Maybe I could help you find something more stable. My company has positions that might interest someone with your background." The offer was genuinely kind, but it made Victoria's deception feel even more overwhelming. Here was this wonderful man trying to improve her fictional circumstances. She possessed resources that dwarfed his own considerable wealth. Their evening was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure. Nathan Cross emerged from the shadows near their bench, his silver hair gleaming under the park lights, and his expensive coat marking him as clearly out of place in their casual setting. "James Montgomery," Nathan called out with false friendliness. "What a surprise to see you here." James stood protectively in front of Victoria, his body language instantly becoming guarded. "Nathan, I didn't expect to see you in this part of the city." "Oh, I was just meeting with some associates nearby," Nathan replied, his calculating gaze settling on Victoria with uncomfortable intensity. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your companion?" "This is Victoria," James said carefully, not offering her last name. "Victoria, Nathan Cross of Cross Industries." Victoria managed a polite nod while her mind raced. Nathan was one of the few people who might recognize her despite her disguise, having attended several business meetings with her father. His presence here couldn't be coincidental. "Charming," Nathan said, studying Victoria's face with barely concealed curiosity. "You look remarkably familiar, my dear. Have we met before?" "I don't think so," Victoria replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I would remember." Nathan mused, his smile predatory. "Perhaps you remind me of someone?" "Tell me, what do you do for work?" James's jaw tightened at Nathan's intrusive questioning. "I think that's enough personal questions for a casual encounter." "Of course," Nathan said smoothly. "I apologize if I seemed forward. It's just that in my business, recognizing faces is important. You never know when you might encounter someone significant in unexpected circumstances." The threat in his words was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria felt exposed under his scrutiny, wondering how much he had already discovered about her activities. Well, it was lovely meeting you both, Nathan continued with false warmth. James, I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other soon. And Victoria, I have a feeling our paths will cross again very soon. After Nathan disappeared into the darkness, James turned to Victoria with concern etched on his features. Are you okay? You look pale? I'm fine, Victoria managed. You just made me uncomfortable with all those questions. Nathan Cross is known for being intrusive, James said grimly. He's been trying to acquire several tech companies, including making overtures about mine. The man has no respect for boundaries. Victoria's phone buzzed again with another urgent message from Alina. This time, the news was worse. Nathan had been making inquiries about the Sterling family's recent activities, specifically asking about Luna Sterling's whereabouts and any unusual behavior patterns. I should get home, Victoria said quickly, her mind spinning with the implications of Nathan's discovery. Early morning tomorrow. James walked her to the subway station, his hand warm in hers as they navigated the evening crowds. At the entrance, he pulled her into his arms for a goodbye kiss that made her forget temporarily about Nathan Cross and her complicated deception. I'm falling in love with you, James whispered against her lips, the confession sending both joy and terror through her heart. James, she began, but he pressed a gentle finger to her lips. You don't have to say anything yet, he assured her. I just wanted you to know how I feel. Whatever challenges you're facing, we can work through them. Together, after James left, Victoria took a circuitous route home, changing trains twice to ensure she wasn't followed. In her penthouse apartment, Alina waited with a grim expression and a laptop displaying surveillance photos. Nathan Cross has been having you followed, Alina announced without preamble. These photos show you entering your fake apartment and later leaving your real building. He knows about your double identity. Victoria studied the images with growing dread. The photos clearly showed her transformation from struggling art student to billionaire heiress, though they didn't capture the full extent of her disguise changes. How much does he know? Victoria asked. Enough to be dangerous, Alina replied. He scheduled a meeting with your father tomorrow, supposedly about a business partnership. But his assistant let slip that he plans to discuss some interesting information about the Sterling family's recent activities. Victoria sank into her leather armchair, the weight of her deception finally catching up with her. He's going to expose me. Not necessarily, Alina said thoughtfully. Is a businessman above all else. If he's discovered your secret, he'll want to use it for leverage, rather than simply exposing you for sport. What kind of leverage? It's access to Sterling technology, favorable business terms, or perhaps influence over your father's company decisions, Alina explained. The question is, what you're willing to sacrifice to protect your relationship with James. Victoria's phone chimed with a text from James, a simple goodnight message that made her heart ache with longing and guilt. She was in love with a man who had no idea who she really was, and now that secret threatened to destroy everything. I need to tell James the truth, Victoria said finally. Are you sure? Lena asked gently. Once you reveal your identity, there's no going back. He'll know you've been lying to him about everything. Victoria thought about James's confession of love, about the way he treated her as... But you took away my choice, James replied. My success, my failure, you predetermined all of it. Richard Sterling stepped forward, his voice carrying steel. That's enough, Nathan. You've made your point. Now state your terms and leave my family alone.
Terms?
Nathan asked innocently. I'm simply ensuring James has all the relevant information before making any decisions about his future with your daughter. Nathan turned back to James with calculated sympathy. You're a brilliant man, James. You've built an impressive company through your own talents. Do you really want to spend your life wondering whether your successes are genuine or secretly orchestrated by your billionaire girlfriend? The question struck at James's deepest insecurities about being a self-made man. Victoria watched in horror as doubt clouded his features, knowing Nathan had identified exactly the right psychological pressure point. James, Victoria pleaded, let me explain. Explain what? James asked wearily. That you've been controlling every aspect of our relationship. That you've been studying me like a subject in your personal research project. I stopped thinking of it that way weeks ago, Victoria insisted, The moment I realized I was falling in love with you. How can I believe anything you say? James asked painfully. Everything between us has been built on lies, Nathan watched. Their exchange was satisfaction before delivering his final blow. Of course, if this story became public, it would be quite embarrassing for everyone involved. Tech mogul deceived by a waitress who's actually a billionaire? The media would have quite a field day. The threat was clear. Nathan held their future hostage, and Victoria realized that even if James could forgive her deception, Nathan's leverage would hang over them indefinitely. What do you want? Victoria asked directly. Nothing unreasonable, Nathan replied. Business partnership with Sterling Technologies, board position, access to your energy patents, standard corporate merger terms. Richard Sterling's expression turned glacial. You're blackmailing my family. I'm offering a mutually beneficial arrangement, Nathan corrected. Your daughter's romantic experiments remain private, and we both profit from increased cooperation, James looked between Victoria and Nathan with growing disgust. You're all treating this like a business negotiation. People's feelings, relationships, love itself, just assets to be managed and leveraged. James, please, Victoria began, but he was already moving toward the door. I need time to think, James said coldly. Away from all of you. If you leave now, Nathan wins, Victoria called after him desperately. James paused at the doorway, his back still turned. Nathan isn't the only one who's been playing games, Victoria. At least his motives are honest. After James left, the study fell into heavy silence. Nathan gathered his materials with satisfaction, while Richard Sterling calculated his next moves with the precision that had built his empire. You've overplayed your hand, Nathan, Richard said quietly. My daughter's happiness isn't negotiable, we'll see, Nathan replied confidently. James Montgomery is an honorable man. He won't build his future on deception, even for love. Nathan departed. Victoria collapsed into her father's chair. Overwhelmed by the destruction of everything she had built with James, Alina appeared with quiet comfort. But Victoria felt beyond consolation. I've lost him, Victoria whispered. He'll never trust me again. Perhaps, Richard said thoughtfully. Or perhaps this is an opportunity to discover whether his feelings for you are strong enough to overcome his pride. How can you sound so calculating? Victoria asked through her tears. Because I love you, Richard replied simply. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest love requires the greatest risk. 3 days passed without word from James. Victoria alternated between hope and despair, replaying their last conversation and wondering if she had destroyed the best thing in her life through her deception. Alina fielded calls from reporters who had somehow learned fragments of the story, while Richard Sterling quietly moved to neutralize Nathan Cross's leverage through methods Victoria preferred not to know about. On the 4th day, Victoria's phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen and she answered with trembling hands. Can you meet me at the gallery where we had our first coffee? James asked without preamble. Of course, Victoria replied quickly. When? The small Greenwich Village gallery looked exactly the same as it had weeks ago, when they had first talked about art and dreams over simple coffee. James sat at the same corner table, but everything between them had changed irrevocably. Victoria approached carefully, unsure whether this meeting represented reconciliation or final goodbye. I've been thinking, James began, without looking at her. It's about truth and deception, about love and manipulation, about whether anything between us was real. Victoria remained silent, sensing he needed to speak without interruption. I realized something. James continued, finally meeting her eyes. In all the anger and hurt, I kept coming back to one question. If you could have had any man you wanted, why choose me? 'Cause you saw me, Victoria replied simply. Not my appearance, not my status, but who I actually am inside. But who are you? James asked. Victoria Sterling, the billionaire heiress. Or the art student I fell in love with? Both, Victoria said honestly, and neither. I'm someone who got lost between the person I was born to be and the person I wanted to become. James studied her face carefully, searching for truth in her expression. If we tried again, really tried, could you be honest with me? Completely honest? Yes, Victoria said without hesitation. About everything, even when it's difficult? Even when honesty might hurt us both? Especially then. James reached across the table and took her hands in his. Then we start over.
From
The beginning. No lies, no deception, no hidden identities. What about Nathan Cross? Victoria asked. Let me worry about Nathan, James said firmly. Your father isn't the only one who knows how to fight dirty when protecting something important. They sat together in the small gallery where their love had first begun to grow. Victoria felt hope returning slowly to her heart. The road ahead would be complicated, requiring them to rebuild trust while navigating the complex realities of their different worlds. But for the first time since Nathan Cross had appeared in the park, Victoria believed their love might be strong enough to survive the truth. They had been tested by deception and manipulation, but perhaps they could emerge stronger by choosing radical honesty and genuine partnership. The billionaire heiress and the self-made tech mogul faced an uncertain future together, but they would face it as equals, with no more secrets between them. And that truth, Victoria realized, was worth more than all the sterling billions combined.